The party was supposed to be the happiest night of my year. I had spent weeks preparing for my company's anniversary celebration, choosing a dress, arranging transportation, and inviting several friends. My husband, Nathaniel, promised he would attend despite being uncomfortable around my coworkers. When he arrived, I barely noticed how quiet he seemed. I was busy greeting guests and laughing with colleagues. Then one of my male coworkers, Derek, approached me and started joking about our office trips. I laughed louder than necessary. Across the room, Nathaniel watched us for several seconds. Then he quietly placed his glass down and walked toward the exit. I noticed him leaving only after the door closed behind him. At first, I assumed he needed fresh air. I continued talking with my friends, but something felt wrong. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I checked my phone and saw no message. I finally called him. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. A strange feeling settled inside me. I excused myself and stepped outside. His car was already gone. I stood beneath the sparkling lights, suddenly realizing that my husband had left without saying goodbye. For the first time that evening, the party felt painfully silent. When I returned inside, my friend Clara asked what had happened. I told her Nathaniel had gone home. She looked uncomfortable and asked whether I'd spoken to him earlier. I said no. Clara hesitated before telling me she had seen Nathaniel standing near the hallway before he left. He had been holding his phone and looked deeply upset. She said Derek had walked past him and made some comment. I immediately wondered whether Derek had said something inappropriate. I searched through my phone and noticed 3 messages from Nathaniel earlier that evening. I hadn't opened any because I was busy. The first message said, "Can we talk tonight?" The second said, "It's important." The third simply said, "Please don't make me ask twice." My stomach tightened. I called him again, but he still didn't answer. Then Derek approached me and asked why I looked worried. I asked whether he'd spoken to Nathaniel. Derek laughed awkwardly and said, "Only for a second." I asked what they discussed. He said Nathaniel had asked him whether he had been spending time with me outside work. Derek claimed he had jokingly answered yes. I stared at him, realizing that his joke might have sounded far more serious to my husband than he'd intended. I rushed home and found Nathaniel sitting alone in the dark living room. He didn't look angry. Somehow, that frightened me more. I sat beside him and asked what had happened. He handed me his phone without speaking. On the screen was a photograph of me and Derek from several weeks earlier at a restaurant. I recognized it immediately. Several co-workers had gone there after work, but the picture made it look like Derek and I were alone together. Nathaniel said someone had anonymously sent it to him with a message claiming I was having an affair. He had spent weeks wondering whether it was true. I immediately explained the photograph. Derek and several other co-workers had been sitting at the same table, but the photographer had cropped everyone else out. Nathaniel said he knew there could be an innocent explanation, but other things had bothered him. I had started working late, become protective of my phone, and mentioned Derek frequently. I realized how suspicious everything looked from his perspective. Then he said, "Tonight, I watched you laugh with him while I stood there feeling like a stranger." His voice cracked. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I told Nathaniel that I had never cheated on him. I admitted, however, that I had become careless about boundaries. Derek and I had developed a comfortable friendship at work, and I hadn't considered how our conversations might look to someone outside the office. Nathaniel said he wasn't asking me to stop having male co-workers. He wanted me to understand that marriage required transparency. I started crying because I knew he was right. I had been so focused on defending my innocence that I hadn't acknowledged his loneliness. His silent exit wasn't really about Derek. It was about months of feeling invisible while I insisted everything was fine. The next morning, I confronted Derek about the photograph. He looked shocked when I showed it to him. He said he hadn't sent it to Nathaniel. After checking with co-workers, we discovered the photograph had been taken by someone who had been angry about a workplace dispute. That person had deliberately cropped the image and sent it anonymously. Derek apologized for his jokes at the party, admitting he hadn't realized how serious the situation had become. I told him our friendship needed clearer boundaries. From that day forward, I stopped having private conversations with him outside work and made sure Nathaniel never felt excluded from that part of my life. Nathaniel and I started counseling shortly afterward. We discovered that our biggest problem wasn't jealousy or Derek. It was our habit of avoiding difficult conversations. I had assumed Nathaniel knew how much I loved him, while he assumed I didn't care about his feelings because I rarely asked what was bothering him. We began having weekly conversations without phones, television, or distractions. Slowly, the tension between us disappeared. Nathaniel eventually told me that walking out of the party had been the hardest thing he'd done because he wanted me to follow him. I smiled sadly and said, "I didn't know you were asking me to." Several months later, we attended another company event together. This time, I introduced Nathaniel to everyone before spending time with my coworkers. Derek was there, but everything was professional and respectful. During the evening, I noticed Nathaniel watching me from across the room. Instead of feeling nervous, I smiled at him. He smiled back. Later, he reached for my hand and said, "Ready to go?" I laughed and said, "Only if you're taking me with you this time." We walked out together beneath the same sparkling lights, but the night felt completely different. I still remember those party lights because they made everything look beautiful while my marriage was quietly falling apart. Nathaniel's silent exit shocked me because I had never realized how deeply he was hurting. I thought leaving without a word meant he had stopped caring. In reality, he cared so much that he didn't trust himself to speak while he was angry. That night taught me that betrayal isn't always an affair. Sometimes it's neglect, secrecy, or simply failing to notice when the person beside you feels alone. We didn't save our marriage by proving who was right. We saved it by finally learning how to listen.